So I'd like to jump into this second section of our morning by talking about aggression, because that really is the piece that most parents are talking about when they talk about bullying. It's the thing that's ugly, you know, it's the broader definition of biting. When you think about what happens with biting, the parent of the biter is mortified. They feel that everyone thinks they're a bad parent. They feel they've got the monster of a child. They must have created this monster. The parents of the bitee feels hugely victimized. And depending on their emotional maturity and empathy, they're out to lynch the parent of the biter. And you again are the magistrate. So when you think about aggression, and biting, I think, is probably the most raw form of aggression. And next to biting, it's kicking. You know, when children are really disgusted. And disgust is one of the primary facial expressions, by the way. Andy Milsov that I was talking about, he was very interested that we help people understand babies' expressions as an emotional vehicle of communicating how you feel. Disgust is basic. So the genesis of aggression is really very different, and I'll share it with you in a little video, from what we think. We typically accept as a society that children who are aggressive have learned to become aggressive because there's either aggression at home, there's an older sibling, they've lived in a harsh environment, they've picked it up somewhere. So violence on television, and before we had violence on television, we had other forms, cockfights, dogfights. You know, society has always tried to explain away aggression by some social artifact that the children somehow pick up. Well, Richard Tremblay, who's an old friend from the early years report days. Now, I don't know if any of you go far back to remember Fraser Mustard's early years report. There's one, there's two, three. Yeah, there you go. Well, I worked with Fraser very closely on that report, and one of the people we brought in to inform our understanding of everything was Richard Tremblay. He's out of the University of Montreal. French is his first language. Richard was really interested in the work that I had been doing because the genesis of our work was violence and aggression in society. And he came and he spoke to us about a 20-year longitudinal study that he had done with the most vulnerable children, and his identification of vulnerable children was children who were born when their daddy was in prison. So here you have a lone parent, and a lone parent in our society operating through shame. Because when someone's in jail, and thank God we don't have the rates of incarceration that our neighbors in the United States have, where there were more young black men in prison than in post-secondary. But there's an aggressive system, right? Rather than a system trying to understand behavior. Anyhow, Richard had done this amazing study of these children, and his thesis was that basically by the time the youngsters start school, if they're still highly aggressive, the outcome's not good. And when I say school, I mean kindergarten. Thank God we've got a sea of you in Quebec now too, which we didn't have at the beginning of his study, because they have very progressive policies in childcare. But Richard's thesis, and you'll hear him speak to it, was that we don't learn to become aggressive. We learn not to be aggressive. And that's the role of parenting, and that's the role of early childhood, to help children cease and desist the natural tendency to aggress. We're all little bear cubs, you know? That, and I also want to speak to the idea of rough and tumble play. That aggression is not the same thing as kids who are naturally active and playful and impulsive, and little boys who will wrestle and tumble, usually break something, usually hurt themselves, but not intentionally. It's playful. And there's the thing, I mean, having grown up with a lot of brothers, I do remember all the grandparents lived with us. It was a madhouse, but I do remember at one point one little tiny granny running for the vase because 3 of the boys were rough and tumble, playful, laughing, shouting, always ending in tears. But to save the vase, because she knew where this was going. And just to say that the bear cub instinct, as I call it, little boys tend to want to roll around and rough around. Rough house, there's a huge value in that. They learn boundaries, they learn borders. They know how hard you can push. They learn that you cannot kneel on your brother's stomach, he'll vomit. Right? They learn when it's too much. So what little girls don't learn as well is the physical boundaries of pain and of physical relationships. They learn more about social relationships. But little boys learn those important lessons. Plus, it's a huge outlet for affection. So typically, daddies play differently with their little girls than they do with their little boys. And I wish they'd roughhouse more with their little girls. There's a joy in the body, there's a joy in force, there's a joy in speed, there's a joy in connecting, hopefully not through punches, but through tickles and, you know, bear hugs, and it's great physical proximity and connection, joyful connection. Richard is the first person I have ever heard say that it's glorious, is the word he used, to see little boys in rough and tumble play. And they remember it. So when kids go to summer camp and things like that, and they're allowed to play in the mud and the water and everything, it approximates it. But we can't allow it in your centers, right? Because it gets out of hand so quickly. But all to say, to reassure parents that when their kids do that, that it's positive. As long as they do understand when they've hurt, and they will hurt. But oftentimes learning is connected with a little bit of pain. Although I don't believe in the phrase, no pain, no gain. That's a vicious phrase. It's like sticks and stones may break my bones and nails.